All right, well, welcome everybody. We are very pleased to put on this webinar this morning on sustainable packaging, and thanks for joining us. My name is Nancy Tregunno, and I'm a food scientist with Perennia Food and Agriculture. We're pretty excited about today's webinar, which is part of our Take Your Product to Market webinar series. This series is funded through the Agri-Food Accelerator Program, which is an initiative of the Canadian Agricultural Partnership, a collaboration of the federal and provincial governments. So for anyone who might be new to Perennia, we are a provincial development agency with a mission to help farmers, fishers, and food processors be more prosperous and profitable. Our innovation group works to help companies create or improve products or processes, optimize shelf life, and scale up production. Perennia also offers services in quality and food safety, ag services, seafood and wine expertise, as well as our cannabis analytical testing lab. So we've had a lot of inquiries from various clients recently interested in reducing their environmental footprint while continuing to offer a safe and effective food package. And we've also heard concerns from some of our ag clients who use materials like plastic mulch out in the field. With every solution that seems to come up, there also seems to be like a negative side. So it's very difficult to navigate this topic and know what's really going to have an impact. So we are thrilled today to have two very knowledgeable and experienced food packaging professionals join us and help us navigate this topic. So Nina Goodrich is going to go first, and how we're going to do it is we'll have her presentation and then a Q&A. So what you can do is as questions come up for you, you can just type them in the Q&A box, and you'll find that by hitting the button located at the bottom of your Zoom screen. It'll say Q&A. A box will pop up and you can type your questions. So I'd like to introduce our first speaker now. And Nina, if you can get your first slide up as I'm doing that, that'll be great.
Okay, I'll do that. I'm going to stop sharing my video. So hello everyone, and I'll work on my presentation.
Okay, I'm going to introduce Nina. Nina Goodrich is the director of the Sustainable Packaging Coalition and the executive director of Green Blue. Green Blue is a non-profit that provides science and resources to make business more sustainable. It is dedicated to help industry use materials wisely, promote material health, and recover more. Nina came to Green Blue with an industry and consultancy background in R&D management, innovation, and sustainability strategy. Nina believes that innovation and sustainability are linked as key drivers for our future. She has worked to develop a value proposition for sustainability and to share it with all who will listen. Nina has held leadership positions in sustainability and R&D with Alcan Packaging, Amcor, Guelph Food Technology Center, and Magic Pantry Foods. She has done graduate work in technology management and holds a BA in molecular biology from Wellesley College in Massachusetts. Regarded as a thought leader in the field, Nina speaks and writes frequently on the convergence of sustainability, innovation, and technology. Thank you for being with us today, Nina.
Thanks, Nancy, for that introduction. It's fun to be working together again. I just want to check, can you hear me, Nancy? Is the sound okay?
Yes, everything sounds good.
Wonderful. So good morning, everyone. I'm located here on the Pacific Northwest, so it's very early morning for me. So hopefully I'll get warmed up here. But I wanted to start by talking a little bit about Green Blue and the Sustainable Packaging Coalition, which is the organization that I lead today. Having spent many years in Canada, in 2012, I moved to Charlottesville, Virginia to lead the Sustainable Packaging Coalition. And I think that it's been a very interesting time, because when I started in 2012, the question people were asking was, is there a business case for sustainability? But as the years have passed, the business case has become much more obvious, and we don't have that particular conversation anymore. So what the organization is designed to do is really programs, but there are many free resources on our website. I'll go through some of them here, but feel free to browse. And if there's anything in particular you're interested in, you can email me, even if it's a member resource, and I can see if I can get it to you. So we have a variety of programs. The flagship program is the Sustainable Packaging Coalition and our How to Recycle label. I'll be talking a little bit more about that label in this presentation. And you may have noticed the label rolling out in Canada as well. So some of my examples here are unfortunately only the ones from the States, because it's not on as many packages yet in Canada, but it is starting to roll out in Canada as well. We also have a program that is a registry for clean ingredients that can be used to develop cleaning products, and that's certified by the Safer Choice program within the US EPA. And we have a lot of work in the forest area as well as in packaging. So certification and understanding how to, many of the forests in North America are not owned by government or large corporations, they're owned by individuals. And so sometimes it's really hard to certify. So we've developed programs for responsible forest management so that brands can check and determine if they're sourcing from small landowners, are they sourcing from responsibly managed forests. We have a number of events, one coming up in Montreal, hopefully. I just had to unfortunately cancel yesterday our event in Austin, Texas, which was supposed to take place at the end of this month due to the coronavirus. So we'll be doing some shuffling of our schedule here, but many of these events are open and they're an opportunity to engage with lots of other folks interested in the sustainable packaging community. We have lots of education materials. This is our Essentials of Sustainable Packaging course. You don't have to be a member. There is a fee associated with accessing these courses, but you do not have to be a member. And they're on a whole variety of different topics. They have worksheets to go along with them. So if you or others in your organization wanted to basically have Sustainability 101 as it relates to packaging, these courses are a great start. The Sustainable Packaging Coalition has 450 members spanning the supply chain. So we're hoping to really galvanize change that can't take place when you just have one section of the supply chain. One of the things we looked at early on was trying to understand packaging goals in this space. As many brands and converters start to make extraordinary goals, sustainable packaging goals, we wanted to create a database of those goals so that if companies were thinking about setting goals themselves, they could go in and they could say, well, what other goals exist? What are good goals? What makes a good goal? What are my competition's goals, or in this particular space? So we looked at over 100 companies, and about 14 different goal categories came out of that. And there was some interesting takeaways. We are refreshing this right now. This was done about a year ago. So things are changing very rapidly in this space, but 86% of the companies we looked at had formal goals or soft commitments related to sustainable packaging. 62% were committed to increasing recycled content. 55% were committed to increasing recyclability. And the fascinating part was that over a third of the recycled content goals were related to paper. And that makes sense when you think about the fact that adding recycled to paper has been around an awful lot longer than incorporating recycled content into plastics. So the goals were really a reflection of the evolution of the industry. This is the Forest in Focus project, which I mentioned, and what's exciting about it is you can choose a mill that you might want to source from, and then you can zoom in to all of the communities around that mill, and you can look at risk. So you can look at whether or not the forest is changing and being used for agriculture, whether it's being developed for housing, other types of changes on the land. You can also look at species of risk. You can look at biodiversity. So it's a great tool to, if you're thinking of sourcing paper from some of these small areas that have a lot of small family landowners, it's a great tool to jump in and have a look at what type of risk you might have. Lots of other free resources, won't go through those in detail, but many, many things available related to sustainable packaging on our website. So let's get into the meat of the presentation. When I think about sustainable packaging, I think about 4 major buckets. The first one is sourcing, and that can include certified materials. It can include recycled materials, in particular post-consumer recycled, bio-based materials, but it's the start of the process, and every material family has a story, and sourcing is important to understand. Then we like to think about material health, and this is becoming more important because when you think about it, as we strive to move towards a circular economy, and I think of circularity as kind of being an umbrella over recyclability. If something's recyclable, it can contribute towards a circular economy, but circular is bigger than just recyclable. So from that perspective, it also includes reusable, but it includes a variety of other pathways. So if we're going to make something circular, the last thing we want to do is circulate something that has environmental health or detrimental health. And this has happened in a number of cases. I'm going to talk a little bit about PFAS later, but there are materials that we definitely don't want to be circular in our economy. So material health is a really big piece of sustainable packaging and becoming even more important. Optimization is probably the category that we're all most familiar with, which is we don't want to overpackage, we don't want to underpackage, but it's always important to remember that the carbon footprint of the product itself is always bigger than the package. And so this optimization bucket is important to ensure that we're not doing something that would ultimately damage or shorten the shelf life of the product. And I see this now, I see a massive move of people moving from plastics into other packaging that have higher carbon footprints and do not perform as well. And so in that rush to leave plastic packaging, there are definitely some unintended consequences and some trade-offs that are not necessarily good for sustainability. And then the last bucket is the one that gets the most attention, which is recovery. That can include recycling, compostability, reusability. It's a rather large bucket, but we tend to think about sustainable packaging in all 4 of these areas. So with that, I want to get into a couple of the pressure points that we're seeing for sustainable packaging. And these are the 2 big concepts: climate change and ocean plastics. And there's an awful lot of attention on ocean plastics, and that is critical and really important. But when we make these trade-offs that have a higher carbon footprint, or we ignore parts of the life cycle that are significant at the front end of a package, I think it's super important to keep climate change in mind. That in my mind, that is the umbrella over all of this, and we don't want to be making trade-offs in sustainable packaging that lead us to a higher carbon footprint overall. So it's just something to keep in mind as we look at different types of packages. So absolutely, everyone's familiar with some of the issues with ocean plastic. Then I'm going to touch a bit on some of the global goals and pacts. I'm going to touch on the Chinese import restrictions that have really challenged the recycling infrastructure in North America significantly, and materials that we have all recycled for many years are now extremely challenged in that recycling system. And then also just want to keep in mind that packaging is hired to do a job. That job is to protect products, whether it's food or others, and food waste being so significant in our society, that packaging is really a key tool to help prevent food waste. So starting with some of the packs, I think probably everybody's familiar with the New Plastics Economy Global Commitments through the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, which was a global commitment that hundreds of companies have signed. Now there are individual packs rolling out in different countries. So there's the UK plastic pack, there's the one in Chile. There is one that was supposed to have its first workshop in 3 weeks' time at our meeting in North America. So these individual packs are rolling out, and many of them have similar but slightly different types of goals. So all of them have 100% of plastic packaging reusable, recyclable, or compostable, 25 or higher average recycle content. And then they start to vary in terms of the recycling rates, in terms of what's effectively collected. And they all typically have something in there about eliminating problematic or unnecessary plastic packaging. One of the first and one of the best was actually the Charlevoix Accord in Canada with the G7. And that is one of the most well-written packs. I'm not sure exactly where it stands today, but that's one that was, I think, instrumental in guiding the voice for some of the other packs that have come after that. So one of the things I want to talk about with ocean plastics is just this idea that most of it is on the seafloor. What we see is 5% of it, which this statistic really shocked me when I first saw this, because I had this image of plastic floating in the ocean in the gyres, but I had no idea that most of the stock is already on the ocean floor. I had the opportunity to sail on this, it's a French research vessel, Tara, that's been doing research on plastic in the ocean all around the world, and they had just come back from a tour of the Pacific. And some of the slides that they shared were absolutely fascinating for me, because what they showed was really this is the average size of what they were getting in their nets. So it's really, really tiny. And the point that they made was that it's the same size as many of the organisms. So the idea of cleaning or sieving this out of the ocean doesn't really make a lot of sense, because you're going to be taking out all those organisms at the same time that are vital to the food chain. And the other thing that they talked about was that the plastics become vectors or rafts for different organisms to move around the ocean in ways that they haven't been able to do before. But the other thing that happens is once they get colonized, they also sink. And so the head of this organization, Romain Trublet, made the point that if we could just stop putting plastic in the ocean, it would eventually sink. So that was a hopeful message, but unfortunately, we're still ramping up the amount of plastic that goes in the ocean on a daily basis. So then the question becomes, should we try and be plastics free? And the problem with that is that the carbon footprint of replacement options can be much higher than the plastic materials, especially thin film materials, which have a much lower carbon footprint. So it really is a conundrum. And I think that as we develop new forms of packaging, in my mind, it's really infrastructure for all forms of packaging, and not just thinking about what is recoverable today. So here are some examples of new paper as opposed to polymer packaging in the candy bar space. and of course the move from PET to aluminum. But the question is today, and I know Canada is so much better than the United States in terms of the amount of material that it collects and recycles, but with aluminum, you need to collect about over 80% of the packages to offset the initial carbon footprint. An aluminum can has 95% less carbon emissions the second time around. But if you don't collect it, then you are not getting the benefit of the reduced footprint from recycling. And paper, these are very thin paper films, and there's a question as to whether or not they're actually valuable in the paper recycling stream, because there's very little pulp, very little value in that material to a mill who's trying to recover paper pulp value, and a question as to whether it would flow. But these are all innovations and experiments at this point in time, and I think that that's what it's going to take. It's going to take innovating with lots of different types of materials, and then looking at our system to ensure that we can still capture some of these materials. So what I think is we really need to embrace the momentum that's created by the single-use plastics and leverage it to tackle these bigger problems, the bigger system-based problems, and not just get distracted by one type of material. So with that, I wanted to share a little bit of information on, you know, what do we generate in our homes? And this was fascinating to me because basically, when you think about what we throw away, most of it's paper. And we oftentimes think about the impact of plastic bottles or different yogurt pots or other types of containers, and yet they're a very, very tiny fraction by weight of our overall recycling stream. And one of the things that I had always heard was, you know, aluminum cans, they're incredibly valuable, but they're not enough to tip the balance in terms of value of material, because there's only 2.7% of them in the recycling stream. And then what has happened over time is the value of those commodities, because of the Chinese export or import bans, the value of those commodities have dropped from a blended bale value of between $80 and $100 a ton down to around 30. And the effect that that has had is that, and this is in the United States, and remember, we don't have EPR, so we don't have a funding mechanism for our recycling system. So Canada's a lot better off that way. But if it costs $80 to $90 a ton to process these materials, and their value is only $36 a ton, you can see the problem. And you can see the issue with some of these materials. Mixed paper, which used to go for quite a bit of money, is now $2.12 for a bale of that material. Corrugate is down from well over $100 to $8. So you can see what's happened to the, and what's starting to create some of these challenges in our recycling market. And one of the things that is also happening is communities are eliminating a broad range of materials from their programs and slimming them down. So less and less is becoming available, which is going to really set us back against all those corporate goals that are out there to use recycled content to make their materials 100% recyclable. The types of materials that we can recycle is actually going the wrong way. So today, our system is out of balance, and it's really, I think, time to rethink and not make incremental changes, but really rethink how we need to get our system set for the future. So how do we create demand? How do we create value for packaging materials so that they can be collected and used again? And there's lots of different things on the table. One of the programs that we're promoting are environmental credits. So think about being able to trade environmental credits the same way that you, or trade recyclability credits the same way that you can trade a carbon offset from solar or wind. priced differently depending on the different technologies, but there's lots of folks talking about that to try to help the system move a little better. I was fortunate in Ontario to be able to take advantage of the solar incentives that came out years ago, and that was a great program that helped develop an industry. So I think that hopefully there's a role for those types of incentives here in sustainable packaging as well. And then there's chemical recycling, which is really, we're going to need chemical recycling. Not all polymers can be effectively mechanically recycled, and in order to capture the value of all of our materials, we absolutely are going to have to develop chemical recycling. Mechanical recycling can't do everything. And there's a whole variety of different technologies that are being developed from chemical recycling. They're not all the same thing. And Canada is really leading with a number of companies, whether it's Loop for PET and Green Mantra for polyolefins. There's a variety of companies in Canada that are doing great work. And so when I think about chemical recycling, and there's a difference between chemical recycling of PET and chemical recycling of polyolefins, because the polyethylene and polypropylene are very different types of polymer chains. They're very long, they're the best they can ever be the day that they're born. And so they can only get worse. And when you break them down, they break into a variety of different products, some of which are fuels. And lots of folks say, oh, well, that's not recycling. If you're making fuel, you know, how can you possibly call that recycling? And this is where I get into that concept that circularity is maybe different than recycling. And if we want to keep these molecules in motion, the carbon footprint of a fuel that's produced from a plastic has a much lower carbon footprint than one that comes out of the ground. And as long as we're still using them, is there a way to think about circularity in terms of technical building blocks? And this came from Kate Raworth. There's a great little BBC video. She's the one that wrote Donut Economics, which is a great book if you haven't read it. But she says nature doesn't turn a daffodil back into a daffodil. Nature creates an ecosystem of materials for reuse. And if we apply that same level of thinking to things like chemical recycling, we can create a bigger ecosystem when we embrace chemical recycling and mechanical recycling to get the best value out of our materials. So I talked a little bit about the difference between the different types of polymers, and polycondensation polymers are easier in the sense to recycle than the addition polymers, but we just need technology solutions for all. And this is the Closed Loop Partners issued a report on chemical recycling, which if anybody's interested, it's on their website and you can get lots of information on all the different technologies. So I want to talk a little bit about recyclability at this point, because if we only design for recycling and nobody buys the material at the end of the process, then it's not really recyclable. So one of the things that we try to do is start with end markets and think, are there end markets here? Is this material reprocessable? Is there something about the design of the package that makes it so that it can't be processed? Is there something about the design of the package that makes it so it can't be sorted? Is it too small? Does it have a shrink sleeve, which doesn't allow it to be detected by a machine at the municipal recycling facility? Can it be collected? Do consumers have access? And another really important part is, are consumers willing to do it? So we developed the How to Recycle label to do two things, to help consumers know what each part of the package, whether it could be recycled, but it's also a really important education tool for brands and packaging developers, because oftentimes they'll submit a package for a label to us, and we'll send them back information, and they'll be like, well, that's not the label that I was expecting or that I wanted. So it's a real education tool on how to improve packaging to make it more recyclable, because lots of times the substrates start out just fine, but then we do something to them, like put a full body shrink sleeve that doesn't allow detection. There are full body shrink sleeves that do allow detection, so it's a choice that one would make, and that would then render that product not recyclable unless the label was removed. So this program is getting bigger and bigger. Lots of members over, we've issued, and this number is out of date, it's actually over 100,000 recommendations, design recommendations back to package designers to date, and we're issuing more than 200 labels a day. So it does change behavior. We've heard from consumers that 67% of people assume that a package isn't recycled unless they see a claim. This is more for the US than it is for Canada, because Canada is much more educated a lot for these things. 83% of people say they learn from how to recycle. So they learned something perhaps that they didn't know. It definitely helps reduce contamination. I didn't show the numbers here, but many of the municipal recycling facilities, I think this is similar in both Canada and the US, have contamination rates from anywhere, or what they would call residuals, anywhere from 15% to sometimes as high as over 20%. So go back to that $80 to $100 a ton processing fee, and if you're losing 20% of the material because it never should have been there in the first place, that's a huge cost to everybody's system. So contamination is a really big deal. For folks that haven't seen the label, it consists of these tiles that apply to each part of the package. And here's an example here where this is a box, probably is a frozen dinner tray of some sort, where there's a paper box that's the outer carton, and then there's an inner carton that has probably a thin film lid, and it's telling you to discard the lid and rinse the tray. And it's telling you here, this is a qualified claim, that it's not recycled in all communities. So in Canada, that would mean that less than 50% of the communities had access to recycle that particular item. And so therefore it carries that qualified claim, not recycled in all communities. And here's an example of two film packages. And this is a way that How to Recycle can help distinguish between lookalike packaging. So the 7th generation pouch is made of pure polyethylene, and it can be recycled with grocery bags at grocery stores. So it carries that store drop-off label, whereas the traditional Chex Mix carries the not recycled symbol, which basically tells consumers that they can't recycle it. And it's really important as we think about how packaging is shifting, and especially when we're moving into now some types of paper packaging that look like plastics packaging, and vice versa. There are plastics packages that have molded fibers in them to make them look like paper. So the label is really important to help consumers do the right thing. And the brands that have stepped up to actually use the not yet recycled label, I think are very bold for doing that. And the consumer feedback is, we like transparency. We'd rather you tell us that something isn't recyclable than have us trying to be figuring out that it is. So wide variety of products carry the How to Recycle label. And as I mentioned before, lots of package design improvements based on the use of the label, which brings me back to where I started in the beginning. Is it's so important to think about these two key drivers when we think about sustainable packaging, because it's my belief that carbon footprint, environmental footprint is the top. And underneath that, we then have to build the systems for all materials, and that plastic in the ocean is a symptom of a broken system, but we definitely don't want to change our move with unintended consequences all out of plastic packaging and then have much higher carbon footprint packaging as a result. So that is the end of my formal remarks. And Nancy, I did it with what, 4 minutes to spare? So I think we can move into the questions.
Great job, Nina. And I have to just let everybody know, Nina started before 6 a.m. this morning, her time. So that was a great job at such an early hour. Nina, I had a question for you while we wait for some questions to come in. So if anyone has any, just type them into your question Q&A box. I was just wondering if anyone is working on the field of biomimicry. I've read just a tiny bit about this to try to learn a little bit more, ways that we could, you touched on this with your daffodil slide, how we can learn from nature. And I just wondered if you'd heard anything about that, because I found it really interesting, sort of studying nature to try to mimic how, peels are a great example on fruit. So we already have that working for us. Are there other things that people are looking at in that field?
Yeah, absolutely. There is, and I'm going to pronounce her name wrong probably, but Janine Banias, who is really a pioneer in the biomimicry field. She is working with a number of companies and brands, and there's a lot of work in the area of biomimicry. It's not something that is mainstream at this stage, so we don't see a lot of that with our members, but there absolutely is an active group working in biomimicry and trying to figure out how we can apply that to packaging. And some of the coatings that have been put, the edible coatings and some of the other solutions along those lines have definitely come out of some of her work.
And we might hear more about that from Lund Talk. I think he's going to talk about edible films.
Great.
I guess I was also curious about what you see as the biggest barriers, because I feel like when you go to the packaging companies, they all say, oh, we're working on this. And there's folks like you that are trying to pull together all the pieces. But I guess it's really going to take a concerted effort on so many different parties. And I'm wondering what you see as the barriers to that all coming together to make this a manageable situation.
Well, what I see in some instances brands making really bold commitments, but the infrastructure just isn't there to collect the material or to reprocess the material so it can be used in a form that they want. So one of the statistics that I heard recently from Susan Robinson, who is a sustainability leader at Waste Management, that 70% of the PET that they collect actually goes to the fiber market. And in the US, only 30% is bottle bill material. And that's all that the brands are using or want to use. But we already know that we're going to have to collect 5 times more than we collect today just to meet the goals that have already been pledged in terms of the amount of recycled content. So sometimes there are these massive disconnects. On the paper side, you saw the market for paper. So what I would say is if someone is investing in a particular technology or trying to move from one substrate to another, get to know the recycling stream, understand what that end market is for that material, because if you're switching because it has some front end benefit and then nobody wants it at the end of the pipe, it makes it super difficult to actually pull that through the system. And I think people never look at that. They just look at, oh, wow, this is paper or this is something else, but they don't think about how is that going to throw 3D solutions made of paper are a great example. They're going to go to the container line. They're not going to flow with paper. They're not going to get into the paper bale. So when we make something new for, say, replacing expanded polystyrene, we have to make sure that it's going to go where it's supposed to go. So from that perspective, I think we sometimes make these decisions in the name of sustainability or in the name of moving from one material to another. We don't think through the implications through the rest of the chain, and then we're surprised when it doesn't all work out.
Right. Thank you. We have a question from Mohammed. He's asking, is there a specific material recommended for food powder packaging?
Oh, I think it really depends on what you're hiring the package to do, what type of moisture barrier you need, what type of, if you need a light barrier for that product, whether or not the powder is, the flavors could be scalped. So that is not a question for me. I think you really would have to understand a lot more about the needs of the individual product. But from a sustainable packaging point of view, if you can stay with a single monomer, if that gives you the properties that you need, such as an all polyethylene pouch, and there's been lots of work done on polyethylene with different types of orientation and different types of even polyethylene layers with different orientations put together to improve the barrier properties of that material. So if you can use something like that, then that is capable of being included in a grocery store drop-off program, provided that the product doesn't stay in the package. So if it's sticky or if it leaves a lot of residue, then it wouldn't be applicable for that.
Okay, great. Mohammed, maybe you can talk to us a little bit more about your product and discuss some of the possibilities. We have a question from Sarah. Do you think that government will start to include recycling information as a requirement in food labeling?
I think it's possible. I think that consumer awareness is growing and consumers want that level of transparency. So I could see, I mean, I was around in the days when the nutritional labels actually started appearing on food products in Canada. And I remember what that was like. So absolutely, I think it is something that could happen in the future.
Also, what is being done by packaging material companies to address laminates? They do have specific properties for barrier characteristics, but are not recyclable.
That's back to the carbon footprint question is, if it's not recyclable, but it has a lower carbon footprint and it protects the product in a way that no other package can, is there a place for that package? And I would say yes. I would say that's where we have to start thinking about chemical recycling for those types of packages that are multi-layer laminates. They're not easy to recycle in our mechanical recycling systems today, but they can be chemically recycled. And so do you want to give up a package that has superior performance for the product and also potentially the process that's used with that food product? And that's really the dilemma that we're facing. And that's why I was trying to say that I think that circularity is bigger than just recyclability. And we've had such a huge focus on recyclability up to now. We're starting to see a little bit of pushback from, understandably, a number of the large film converters that are saying, you know, wait a minute, do you really want to go back to something like glass or metal for something that has these barrier requirements? So it's tricky. That's exactly the conundrum, is carbon footprint versus recyclability.
Yeah, it is a conundrum. Another one here. What are your thoughts about energy from waste initiatives?
Well, I think that I like the idea of chemical recycling before energy, before plastic to waste, but I think plastic to energy is better than landfilling it. You know, we're starting to find in the effluents of a lot of landfills, a lot of microplastics. And microplastics are getting into the environment. Consumers, I mean, it's something they can't see. So they're not having the same visceral reaction to microplastics as they're having to plastics in the ocean. But it's an even bigger problem. So from that perspective, I think that we have to not just put these things in landfills. We have to figure out a way either to recapture the material value, which is better than just the energy value. But I do think that is a role for that, especially in parts of the world where they just don't have any other infrastructure, if it can be done in a way that mitigates any of the emissions.
So there's another question here that's kind of a two-part question. Why is the US still not up to speed with recycling? That is probably a question in your mind too, but do you have an answer to that?
Well, yes. The difference is that solid waste is the responsibility of every individual municipality. So it's very difficult for a state, the way that a province in Canada can set EPR fees, they can set a recycling strategy. You can't do that in a state in the US easily because it's in each individual municipal budget, and it's part of the whole state's rights and, you know, city rights. So it's a patchwork, and each individual city decides how they're going to do it, if they're going to do it. I mean, there are still only 60% of Americans have equal access to recycling and trash. That's astonishing when you think about it. It's horrible. So from that perspective, the system just hasn't worked. It hasn't become enough of a priority. When you're trading off police officers for additional recycling pickups, the police officers usually win, or the schools. And so it needs a separate financing mechanism. There is a bill in that was introduced just a few weeks ago, the Udall-Lowenthal bill. It's the first time that there's ever been any federal legislation looking at improving recycling across the US. Several states have certainly tried and attempted it, and Washington State, where I live, is very progressive for the US. So from that perspective, there are pockets in the US, but it all comes down to who owns the responsibility. And here it's the individual cities, and they don't always work so well together.
So it might have to change to state responsibility to get better.
Or federal.
Yeah, or federal. The other part of that question is kind of about where does the problem lie using plastic or not recycling it? And also it's worded, is the solution reducing plastic or just in cleaning up the waste management stream worldwide?
I think there's different solutions for different places. And so where you see a lot of flexible packaging waste in Indonesia and Asia, the valuable materials like the PET bottles oftentimes get picked up, but you would have to pick up so many of the flexible packages to make it worthwhile that it's really hard to institute a system there that's going to work. But with blockchain technology and cell phones, there's a lot of great examples of incentive programs for the workers who are actually picking up this material to get credit for having done it and to get money moved into accounts. So from that perspective, I think that the infrastructure has to be for everything. I think that's what I'm trying to say, is that even our mixed paper infrastructure in the US anyway, I'm not sure if it's true in Canada, is also broken. Mixed paper is going to landfill in certain instances, which is crazy. We've known how to recycle that for years, but we were so reliant on exporting it to other countries to deal with our materials that we didn't develop the infrastructure. So our infrastructure is also extremely weak in North America.
There's a question about degradable bio-based plastics. Is there any problem with that in terms of its performance? And also, I guess if you could speak to that. I know that also will be addressed in Lungtak's presentation. Just maybe some thoughts around degradable bio-based plastics.
Sure. So we have a position against oxy-biodegradable additives and some of the other additives that will make a plastic, quote, biodegradable. We like to use the word compostable because there's a time and a temperature parameter associated with that compostability. And bio-based plastics that are compostable, absolutely, we're in favor of those. What we're not in favor of is where you take an additive that breaks a material down into effectively microplastics and has claims that it's going to break it down in the ocean, or it's going to break it down if it just sits around on the street. We feel that that enhances littering, that it enhances bad behavior, and that these biodegradable additives, like the oxy-biodegradable additives, will also, it's unknown what the effect will have in the current mechanical recycling market for those materials. So if you have something that has an additive in it, like oftentimes it's being offered for films or grocery bags or things of that sort, I mean, it's magic, it's just going to disappear. And the idea is we don't know what the impact is in the recycling stream. There's a lot of durable products, decking, Trex decking and things like that are made from polyethylene films. And if those materials have these additives in them, will it make them less durable? And no one has ever gone through the testing at the Association of Plastic Recyclers to prove that they aren't detrimental. So our position and the Ellen MacArthur Foundation's position is against the use of biodegradable additives, but extremely supportive of the use of compostable plastics.
I have to add a comment that I received from somebody who couldn't make it today. He wanted to be here, but he was tied up. He runs a composting facility here in Nova Scotia, and he has a lot of problems with quote unquote compostable plastic. So they get a lot of like the compost bags and that type of thing in their compost stream. Because here in Nova Scotia, composting is mandatory, so everybody has it at home. So he was saying that a lot of those bags, even though they may have gone through the testing and been proven to break down, he finds that in his commercial composting site, they do not break down even within a 12-month period, and they cause a lot of issues. So I thought that was interesting from his perspective. They're not the best.
Yes, it is interesting. And Washington State has recently enacted a rule that all compostable, well, the colors green and brown can only be used for compostable bags. And they can't be used in bags that aren't compostable, because what was happening, because Washington, Seattle, it's mandatory as well. And people were taking the little green film bags that they get for produce in the grocery store. And because they were green, they were assuming that they were compostable, and they were putting them in lining their bins with that in their houses. And then they were throwing that in the compost stream, and none of those were, of course, composting. So there is an issue with lookalike plastics. There's an issue with education. And there is an issue depending on the type of facility. And there are 3 types of composting facilities. One is in Canada, oftentimes uses in vessel, but just because of the weather. But then there's the aerated static pile, and then there's the Gore system technology. And all of them have slightly different temperatures, and yeah, some materials do better in some than others. And so that's absolutely true.
Okay, I think that's it for questions, and it's 5 to 11. So at this time, I will say thank you so much to Nina for a really interesting presentation.